Welcome to the Bitcoin Infinity Academy, brought to you by the Plan B Network and Bitbox. I'm Knut Svanholm. This is the course on Sovereignty Through Mathematics, my first book. And I'm here, as always, with Luke de Wolf. Good morning, Luke. How are you today?
Good morning, Knut. I'm excellent. I'm excited to cover this chapter on a new form of life. How are you today?
All good. We're doing all the things, preparing for all the conferences that are coming up and stuff. The new version of Praxeology is just out on Amazon and bitcoininfinity.com, so excited for that. I think it's our most ambitious book yet, I'd say. So excited for that and excited to keep on doing the Academy. I love it all.
Yes, absolutely. And the Praxeology, for those who aren't aware, is the bonus edition to the Mithril Adamantium membership. Basically, we're including the Praxeology course for free in that membership. So this is going to be the fifth course of the Bitcoin Infinity Academy. We're on course number 1 with Sovereignty Through Mathematics and Praxeology. Well, we'll get there eventually, but it's going to take a little while. But we're having a lot of fun, and hopefully you are too. So I'm ready to just dive in. I think, is there anything else to mention before we start?
No, I'm just saying that this is the last but one chapter, I think. So after this book is done, we'll have playlists available and stuff, so you can go back to this and go through all the videos. And the Academy will become this great library of both videos and books. And I love doing it. So let's hop in and go to our Geyser Fund, geyser.fund/project/infinity, to know more about how you can participate in these things and have a monthly call with me and Luke and, comment and ask questions about each chapter. It's well worth it. And as Luke said, you'll get the entire book bundled, signed books and t-shirts and whatnot. So yeah, everything is there.
Perfect. And with that, let's get started. A new form of life. It's not easy to define the properties that would deem an entity a new form of life. There's no consensus among scientists or nations regarding the definition of what a life form is. This is one of the main hurdles when it comes to defining artificial or synthetic life. How does one know when life is being created if there's no clear definition of what life actually is? One popular definition of life is that a living organism is an open system that maintains homeostasis, is composed of cells, has a life cycle, undergoes metabolism, can grow, adapt to its environment, respond to stimuli, reproduce, and evolve. Could Bitcoin fit into this description? In order to find out, we need to dissect both this definition of life and the basic properties of the Bitcoin network. Bitcoin is quite clearly an open system, but what does it mean for an organism to maintain homeostasis? Homeostasis is the tendency towards a relatively stable equilibrium between interdependent elements, especially, but not limited to, as maintained by physiological processes. The first part of that sentence perfectly describes what Bitcoin does. The equilibrium is the consensus between the nodes, which act as interdependent elements. One could even argue that they actually are maintained by physiological processes, since each node's decisions are ultimately made by human brains and not software. But for now, we'll examine Bitcoin as a life form from a non-meta argument perspective. The next part of the definition is that life is made up of cells, which the Bitcoin network also arguably is, especially if you count nodes as cells. Okay, interesting chapter, Knut. What are you getting at here with all this life cycle stuff?
Yeah, this is one of those chapters that is sort of an embryo for a bigger chapter in a later book, and we go through this in a chapter in the inverse of Clown World called "We Are All Satoshis." How the node is actually the person and not the hardware and the software. But this is sort of the foundations for that, and alluding to here, what was the word? Non-meta argument perspective, that you can view Bitcoin as a life form even without admitting that each technical component is actually a person. There's a person behind every node.
Yeah, interesting idea. I think the entire chapter is quite the interesting take. Definitely one of the more out there chapters for this book, but I think the important messaging here is something like that Bitcoin is really this new system, and there's a lot of parallels to I suppose the science of decentralized computing. Like, what does it mean to have a decentralized computing network over the internet? And lots of interesting stuff here. What gave you this idea originally, do you think?
I don't remember where I got the idea from. Other people have written about the similar things, like Brandon Quidham, for instance, who wrote an excellent article called "Bitcoin is Mycelium" way back. These two are written around the same time. I don't remember if I read that before I wrote this, but I knew there were other things written about Bitcoin being some kind of life form when this book came out. So as most of us authors or writers writing about Bitcoin do, we sort of funnel ideas from here and there and give our own takes on it. But influences come from everywhere, and this I just wanted to explore the idea, so I looked up this definition of life and started from there and tried to explain Bitcoin from that perspective. Even though it's mostly a mental gymnastics, if you want, like brain mental gymnastics in the sense that it's a brain exercise. I still think it's interesting to see things from this perspective. Bitcoin being this great cardiovascular system of value between human beings.
Excellent. And maybe we should continue with the exploration. Get into it a little more deeper.
Absolutely.
A life cycle is defined as a series of changes in form that an organism undergoes, returning to the starting state, according to Wikipedia. The life cycle of the Bitcoin network is still unclear, but it seems unlikely that it will ever return to its starting state. What is more likely is that while we have witnessed its birth, it is highly unlikely that any human alive today will outlive the network, so we won't have any way of knowing. This is not unheard of in nature either, however. A species of fungi called Armillaria ostoyae, or the humongous fungus, in the Blue Mountains of Oregon, is one of the largest and oldest organisms ever known to man. This mushroom network is estimated to be between 2,500 and 8,500 years old, based on its current growth rate. No one knows what its life cycle looks like in perfect detail. Okay, so just a comment here, I guess, about that Bitcoin might not be satisfying one of the definitions of life, but it's parallel to like a fungus, something like that.
Yeah, it may have life, but it's unclear if it has death. That's sort of the point of this. I guess at some point there will only be one sat left because of the unforgiving nature of the arrow of time. However, that is, if Bitcoin just keeps on functioning the way it does, that will take a long time for sure.
Yes, practically irrelevant to anyone who is alive today. Basically, it's on the same level as heat death of the universe type stuff. Would you say?
Not quite, but close. I mean, it's still a smaller time scale than that. That's the autist answer, I guess. But the heat death of the universe is quite far away in time wise. Probably a lot later than whenever Bitcoin dies. Anyway, the point of this is this specific paragraph is this fungi metaphor here, that there are organisms that can get like insanely old, and Bitcoin is probably one of those. Hopefully one of those.
Hopefully, yeah. All right, moving on. The three main purposes of metabolism in a living body are the conversion of food to energy to run cellular processes, the conversion of food into bodily building blocks, and the elimination of nitrogenous wastes. Bitcoin's metabolism works in a similar manner. Bitcoin feeds on electricity, and its cellular processes are its transactions. Its body has its own building blocks, literal blocks, that are added to its body, the blockchain, roughly every 10 minutes. Malicious blocks are considered waste and are thus eliminated by the system. Bitcoin grows and adapts to its environment organically, exemplified lately by the development of the Lightning Network and other Layer 2 scaling solutions. It responds to external stimuli by showing a more and more ironclad resistance to change while still responding well to sufficiently clever improvement proposals. Like the Armillaria ostoyai, Bitcoin grows rather than reproduces, and it evolves over time by adopting good ideas and rejecting bad ones. Okay, it's some interesting stuff here, including, I think, a parallel between effectively the people who work on Bitcoin and cells, something like that. It's sort of like acting like the cells of Bitcoin are the people that do stuff that make the improvements, something like that.
Yeah, or even the transactions. I think the people using Bitcoin as its cells, sort of like the individual Bitcoiner is the cell of the network. Here, I could, if this was written in after February 2023, I might have added something about cancer tumors in these cells in the form of JPEGs and other arbitrary data that can infect the cell from within, and like that, the organism will have to figure out a way to survive this cancer and remove the tumors from itself. And that might not be an easy thing to do. However, it is crucial for the long-term survival of this mycelium network.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think this is definitely one of the strongest parts of this comparison, and it really comes down to that there are just so many people doing so many things on or to Bitcoin, and I think you're right. Ultimately, the transactions is the way that the organism itself grows up. It's what shows that people are actually using the network, adopting it as money. But I think part of my other point is that when people are doing development on Bitcoin and actually making changes that might eventually lead to some kind of actual change, like if we're using the fungi metaphor, like splitting off a different branch of the fungus in a hard fork type sense, or I don't know what a soft fork exactly would look like, but yeah, change is being made similar to how the cells in the body can make changes. Like if you stress your body by lifting heavy weights or something, your body responds and does stuff a little differently. And I think that's how Bitcoin reacts to sort of external stimuli, like the way people are using Bitcoin, and sometimes people have to make adjustments, fix bugs, stuff like that.
Yeah, and there are, just like in real life and in evolution, like on a timeline, there are very specific points in time where, like, humanity we had a common ancestor with the Neanderthals, for instance, and we branched off, we hard forked at a very specific point in time. There must have been a specific set of parents and two specific set of children that forked off. And the one of the forks didn't make it. Neanderthals are not around anymore, and humans are. And it's very similar to like the Bitcoin Cash hard fork in Bitcoin. We had a common ancestor, and we branched off, and the less evolutionary and advantageous fork just didn't make it, and the Bitcoin Cash isn't worth shit anymore. So, and I mean, another thing about this entire chapter is that you can use this metaphor in many different ways. I just chose to use like the Bitcoiners as cells and building blocks being like the blockchain being its body. You could also view the blockchain and the blocks as literal shit, like the fecal matter of the network, that it's not important once the block is like historic. The block only matters in the present. But like all metaphors around Bitcoin is this, Bitcoin is that, they're all flawed, and they all have some grain of truth to them. But it's important to remember that none of the metaphors is 100% accurate. Like a Bitcoin wallet is not really a wallet, more of a keychain, but something between the two. A blockchain is not really a chain of blocks. It's more like a spreadsheet that adds data. However, I love the exercise of just thinking of Bitcoin in metaphors and trying to explain it through different lenses, because I think with every new metaphor, you reach another set of your audience to orange pill, if you will. So yeah.
I definitely agree with that. And let's read one more short paragraph here before making a couple more points along this specific line. The notion of Bitcoin as a life form may sound far-fetched and even a bit silly, even though a lot of its properties fit the bill. What we do know about it is that it is very unlikely to go away or stop functioning in the foreseeable future. Whether or not Bitcoin is alive is up for debate, but it can't be killed, and that ought to mean something. We should study it carefully and try to be as unbiased and humble as possible when drawing conclusions about it. I have some thoughts about this, but what do you think? Would you change anything about this paragraph in the current era?
No, I immediately come to think about something Michael Dunworth said in Sydney a couple of months back. And that is like, Bitcoin is the first thing that humans have built that humans cannot destroy. And I just love that framing, like, because it's truly unique in that particular sense. Yeah, here we may go into that Bitcoin actually could be killed if we don't survive this latest attack or whatever. I still think there's a high likelihood that it can't be killed. So what were your thoughts?
Well, basically along that exact line, I think it's not necessarily about Bitcoin being killed or not. I think Bitcoin, the network, Bitcoin, the technology, that might actually be the thing that can't be killed. Because as long as people are using it, right, then that's okay, good. That thing isn't dying, right? But I think the thing to be a warning about, maybe the metaphor of these monkey JPEGs and all this DeFi stuff and whatever else that people are trying to throw into Bitcoin, maybe it's not necessarily cancer exactly as the right thing, but maybe more like a genetic splicing, turning Bitcoin into something that it isn't, or something that it wasn't intended to be originally, right? Bitcoin as money is absolutely under threat here, in probably a low chance, but if Bitcoin stops being used as money, you can debate whether that means the thing is dead or not. To me, it would be dead if Bitcoin gets completely captured and doesn't actually end up being used as money anymore. It's just a piece of technology being used to facilitate scammers and government crap. Then what is Bitcoin?
I mean, this is a great question. So imagine if during the Bitcoin Cash hard fork that the quote unquote good fork would have been the minority fork and the bad fork would have been the bigger one. Which might be the case if we hard fork in the future and you get Bitcoin database and Bitcoin money, right? And right now, Bitcoin database, according to how many nodes, like we're 10.5% Bitcoin knots nodes. So let's say that the Bitcoin database is 10 times bigger, and all the, shitcoiners and, exposure to Bitcoin people win this race, and they keep on using this type of Bitcoin. That might go on for like 100 years, that being dominant, but Bitcoin money could still exist in the background. And it's only when this Bitcoin database chain is so clogged that it's not decentralized by any stretch of the imagination anymore that people will wake up to, holy shit, this smaller fork was actually the real deal. And there is a scenario where we fork off and then come back in like 400 years from now and become the dominant fork anyway. So like, it doesn't necessarily mean that Bitcoin dies if it forks off and one of the forks stays dominant for X amount of time. That doesn't mean it was killed. I mean, to be fair, like to the Bitcoin Cash people, that is still the original Bitcoin. They think that they are on the correct network, and I don't believe that it will ever happen that Bitcoin Cash becomes more valuable than Bitcoin normal, simply because of the fact that Bitcoin Cash is not decentralized. It has it doesn't have limited block space, and it has set a precedent for not having limited block space, meaning that this chain will, if used, will be clogged with shit, and it will be impossible to run a node because it will be very costly to do so, and therefore this chain will be controlled by miners and not nodes. So it's not Bitcoin. However, a fork where what I consider to be normal Bitcoin, or what we consider to be normal Bitcoin, like Bitcoin being used as money and not as monkey JPEG storage, that may fork off, be smaller, but come back in 400 years from now. We don't know.
Very good. Shall we continue?
Absolutely.
Speaking of fungi, one of the most important aspects of money is its fungibility. Fungibility goes hand in hand with privacy and censorship resistance. If certain Bitcoin addresses were to end up on a government's blacklist, they'd end up becoming less valuable than their not yet blacklisted neighbors. Look at what happened to the Indian rupee bills that were banned overnight by the Indian government in late 2017 in order to fight corruption. They're still in use, but only worth about 70% of the value they held when they were considered legal tender. If Bitcoin transactions can't be private, they won't be fungible. This would reduce Bitcoin's monetary capability. We're at a point in history where Bitcoin transactions can be completely private, but only a select few people know how to ensure that they really are. This is arguably Bitcoin's greatest flaw, and a very real hurdle on the way to mainstream adoption. Okay, some interesting stuff here. What do you think about this paragraph now?
Oh, yeah, this is super interesting. It's just scratching the surface of many much bigger topics, like coin joins and the privacy of the Lightning Network and all sorts of stuff. Fungibility is interesting because what constitutes a fungible good is in the eye of the beholder. So, like, it's entirely subjective. Like, it's just like how what constitutes a homogeneous good is entirely subjective too. One person may enjoy apples over oranges, but to a third person, it might all be in the category of fruit, and then fruit is the homogeneous good. So if the more people that act as if KYC Bitcoins and non-KYC seed Bitcoins are the same thing, and the better off the network is. The more people treat some sats differently than others and believe false narratives such as the rare sat, like there is no such thing as a rare sat. Every sat is created equal. Not all men are created equal, but all sats are. There is no such thing as a rare sat. So I am a proponent of, like, Bitcoiners should treat their sats equal. Even though it might be clever to have a non-KYC stack and a KYC stack if you want to use them for different purposes, the SAT itself should, like, have the same value to you. You should view it as the same thing. I think this is good for the entire network. And the more coins that are coin joined and the more coins that are harder to trace, the better off the network is, because it will be harder for legislators to differentiate between the two. And having said all this, like, already in its normal state, Bitcoin is entirely anonymous. People say pseudonymous, but I really don't think it is, because you cannot prove that another person does not own all the Bitcoin ever. It is possible for everyone to be aware of the same information, and a Bitcoin private key is just information. So you can't really prove that someone does not own a Bitcoin. Theoretically, everyone on Earth could own all the Bitcoin and know all the private keys. The likelihood that they do is low, but there is no way to prove that they don't. So we're trying to prove a negative by associating certain Bitcoin with certain people. You only own them in the sense that you have the access to the key that unlocks them, so you can move them on the network. But it's not really ownership, and there is so much here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the interesting thing is I think the coin joining and privacy on Bitcoin on chain thing was a bit bigger a couple of years ago here. Certainly it was more in the news when, for example, Samurai and Wasabi were both essentially shutting down. Wasabi is still going on, uh, albeit not coordinated by the wallet itself. So you have to go find your coordinators and all this. And so I think you do have a lower usage rate, which isn't all that positive. But I really like your point that Bitcoin basically is private by default. It's private unless you dox that you have this address, basically. And it's private to everyone except the people who know about the transaction, right? The two people involved in the transaction.
Yeah, the more time that passes, the more of a non-issue it becomes, because all the coins get mixed up. Then the older the network becomes. So, but for instance, if I take my coins off an exchange, if you do that, if you have them KYC'd on an exchange, and you send them to a certain address, make sure you immediately send them to another address, and thereby you destroy that link. And you can't, the exchange can't give the authorities the information that you bought them at one point and then you spent them at another point, and therefore there's capital gains tax and stuff. If you immediately send them to another address, it's very likely that they don't know that if you still have them or not. So no cap gains tax. So there are so many measures you can take. And also, like you said, if I receive a Bitcoin from you, you can know when I spend it and how much of it I spent, but that requires you to monitor it. So it requires an active participation in spying on me from you. And also, if I immediately send them into CoinJoin, and you cannot know what amount came out the other end. So there are ways of doing this stuff, and the harder we make it for these third parties and the chain anal companies that try to quote unquote prove who owns what in Bitcoin, like, we should actively try to make their life hell, because what they're doing is highly immoral and not even proof at all. You cannot, as I said before, you cannot prove that someone doesn't own a Bitcoin. So it's all vaporware. Yeah, I really dislike it.
I'm completely with you. I think the next paragraph also touches on a little bit more of this stuff here. So let's read that one also. So, how many privacy measures does the average user need to take? Just as when it comes to storage, it depends on the user's knowledge level. Most users should probably be more careful than they are right now, but there's little reason to be paranoid. It's still very hard to prove that a specific transaction was made by a specific user. The whole ordeal is somewhat akin to the fight against the BitTorrent network 10 years ago. The copyright lobby found different means of scaring off users in different parts of the world, banning websites, prosecuting providers, and so on. But the network itself is still thriving, and torrent files are as accessible as they ever were. A lot of heads will probably have to roll before Bitcoin is accepted everywhere. But just like they couldn't fight file sharing, governments won't be able to fight Bitcoin. Even the policymakers will understand the advantages of Bitcoin usage sooner or later. The word later is key here. If you want to be absolutely sure that what you do with your Bitcoin is legal, private, or worthwhile, just wait. Wait out the storm, and don't use them until they're fully acceptable everywhere. They'll be worth a lot more, and you'll have a lot more options in general. Remember, hodling is using. Yeah, very good. Emphasizes our previous points, I think.
Yeah, there's a lot in this paragraph too. Like the first thing about you should like do things on your knowledge that are like in your knowledge level. I think that's a great point. Bitcoin can be a very harsh teacher. If you do something wrong, if you're not careful enough, you can lose your coins. So you shouldn't fiddle around if you don't feel safe fiddling around. That's basically the point I'm making there. And also hodling is using, also important. It's this, I prefer medium of exchange over time and space, as you know, rather than store value. I think the dichotomy is false. Of course, there is the argument that Bitcoins need to be used as a medium of exchange over space for mining to function at all. But they are being used as a medium of time over space. And it's sure, the fees may be low because we're not using it as much as we should. But still, most users could be hodling and the network would be fine. Whereas people tend to forget that the difficulty adjustment algorithm works both ways. And it's not our problem if a specific miner goes out of business. And the only thing that the 10-minute interval and the difficulty adjustment adjusting every 2 weeks, it's still a thing. It doesn't matter. It's just that we're so used to hash rate always going up that we've sort of forgotten that it functions, if not even better, on the way down, because it throws like miners that don't have a sound business model off the market.
Oh, very much agree. I think let's end off the chapter here and see if there's any summary points.
Sure.
One of the greatest hidden perks of Bitcoin adoption is that it forces people to think for themselves. First, it forces the user to think about computer security. In order to store your Bitcoins safely, you have to know what you're doing, what software and hardware you can trust, etc. It is virtually impossible to do anything online without trusting any third party. Every piece of hardware and software inside and in between each of the two computers communicating could potentially be corrupt. In Bitcoin, the cautious user will be rewarded, and the reckless user will be punished eventually. This is also true for Bitcoin's on and off ramps, and the less cautious user is always more likely to end up in legal trouble. The coming tsunami that is hyper-Bitcoinization is scary, but a skilled surfer can expect the ride of his lifetime. All right. So this summary paragraph is a little less of a summary, more of a kind of ending point to this aside about privacy and adoption and hodling and all this. And so we can get back to the original point here before we close. But interesting. And I think it just reinforces the exact thing we were talking about. You need to take responsibility for yourself, a common theme that comes up in all of our books, basically.
Yeah, and it's about this. I tweeted about this yesterday, I think. It's like if you would have listened to toxic Bitcoin maximalists, instead of all the other types of people you could have listened to, like traders and influencers and whatnot, shitcoiners, shitcoin apologists, Bitcoin first companies, all of this other stuff, then you would have had more. If you had listened to the Bitcoin maximalists instead, you would have had more money, more security, more privacy, and more sovereignty than if you had listened to anyone else. And that will be true for the coming 10 years too. Because Bitcoin maximalists, all we do is warn people about bullshit. That is our only goal. Like we want people, sure, it pumps our bags. If Bitcoin purchasing power goes up and if Bitcoin continues to function, we will be rewarded for it. So we do have an incentive to do so. But the incentive we have is to tell people to not trust but verify. The incentive we have is to keep the network decentralized so it functions over time. The incentive we have is all based on honest stuff, which is not true for any of the other quote-unquote influencers. So be very careful out there. Don't trust, verify. But if you need to trust, at least trust the people that tell you to not trust. Like to don't trust but verify. Like that's the gist of it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's a little bit of a meta thing here for us. Like, I think everything that we advocate for in the discussions that we try to create and all this, it's about amplifying the voices that say, hey, yeah, take your Bitcoin into cold storage, take responsibility for it yourself, and try to advocate for Bitcoin in ways that help it succeed and help bring other people to the network. Conviction deepening, something like this. And it's a great thing that getting people to take responsibility for their money and for everything around that. We haven't seen the full effects of that yet. Absolutely not. And coming back to the kind of Bitcoin as life thing, like this organism, this form of life that's been injected into the world, I'm certainly excited to see what happens within our lifetimes, because whatever is after that is Well, we can't experience that at least. But yeah, everything that is going to happen because Bitcoin came into the world and is changing the world for the better. I'm certainly no advocate for change for the sake of change. Change always happens. The world is not in isolation. There's always a trend towards things disintegrating and order becoming chaos again, that sort of thing. But Bitcoin is a really positive change so far, and I believe that this if Bitcoin can be considered a mind parasite to some extent, it's a very good mind parasite. If it's nothing more than, it might not be more than that, right? Like it's a mind meme in the minds of all the Bitcoin users. It's supported by this technological layer, but in the end, it's in everyone's minds, and it's changing the minds of humanity. It's my turn to go ultra deep here. That was my Knut impression, something like that.
It's beautiful. No, it's absolutely beautiful. And the bigger this thing becomes and the more attention it gets, the more it attracts noise. So it's very hard to find the signal in the noise. Like the purists are, the growth of the purists is slower than the growth of the charlatans. So the higher the higher Bitcoin's purchasing power, the more scammers you have. And the latest fad is sort of these companies that put quote unquote Bitcoin on the balance sheet, and you're supposed to buy their stock because if you do so, you get exposure to Bitcoin. Paper Bitcoin is not Bitcoin. Take them off of the exchange, hold your own private keys, run your node, do all the things. Otherwise, there's no point to any of this. So yeah, with that, I think we're done with Bitcoin as a life form chapter thingy here.
I believe we are. And with that, this has been the Bitcoin Infinity Academy. Thank you for listening.
Bye-bye.